Good evening.
Welcome to the Jewel Collins Smith Museum of Fine Art at Auburn University.
I'm Aisha Ali, a master's student in Consumer and Design Sciences, focused in apparel design and merchandising, and member of Pakistani Student Association.
And my name is Molly Work, and I'm a junior getting my bachelor's in fine art and minoring in psychology, hoping to do art therapy.
Tonight, it is our distinct pleasure to welcome you to an artist talk with Anila Quayyum Agha.
Our event tonight is being live streamed on Facebook and YouTube, and we want to thank you so much for joining us, whether that's in the comforts of home or in person.
If you are here in person, please remember to wear your masks and silence your cell phones.
And now, to introduce this evening's program, please join me in welcoming Cindy Malinik, Director and Chief Curator at the Jewel.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Molly and Aisha. We're gathered here this evening on the homelands of the Muskegee, or the Ocmulgee people, some of the original stewards of the land. They were descended from the mound builders of the Mississippi River Valley. They lived here raising families, farming, growing a variety of crops. Forcibly removed to the west during the Trail of Tears, a small clan known as the Porch Band remains today to the south of us. And no doubt their enduring relationship with this place continues. I call forth the Muskegee because it is important for us to always seek to understand our place in the world within that long history, including tonight as we welcome Anila Agha and celebrate her exhibition, The Weight of Black. I hope that some of you have spent time already in the installation, and if you've not, you'll certainly be able to return between now and when it closes on Sunday, January 2nd, 2022. Anila Quayyum Agha is a remarkable artist and a lovely friend, developing sculptures that are both objects and spaces, portable and site-specific. The installation in Auburn consists of 3 sculptures: Itinerant Shadows, Shimmering Mirage, and This Is Not a Refuge, the illuminated house in the largest of our galleries. Agha's work references architecture, Islam, and craft. Here it also references migration, resettlement, and loss. Born in Lahore, Pakistan, Agha uses her work to explore questions of politics, identity, and gender. She has said it investigates binaries such as public and private, or light and shadow. The intricate cuts and floral patterns remind us not only of Islamic architecture, but also of embroidery, gendered ideas of femininity, and patterns of beauty. Her work has been exhibited widely, including at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, the Rice Gallery at Rice University in Houston, the Dallas Contemporary Art Museum, the Cincinnati Art Museum, and the Grand Rapids Art Museum, amongst many others. In 2014, she was awarded both top prizes, the Public Vote and Grand Prize, at Art Prize, the internationally renowned festival in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Currently, she is the Morris Eminent Scholar at Augusta University in Augusta, Georgia. Tonight, we are delighted that Anila will be in conversation with Kristen Tordella-Williams, Assistant Professor of Sculpture in the Department of Art and Art History. Professor Tordella-Williams is a recent addition to the Auburn faculty, and we're so pleased that she can be with us. An interdisciplinary artist and arts educator, Kristen was previously Associate Professor of Studio Arts at Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi. Her work is currently on view at the Mississippi Museum of Art as part of the 2021 Mississippi Invitational. My thanks go out tonight to the entire museum staff for their important work surrounding this exhibition, from installation to engagement to welcoming you all here this evening. I'm also grateful to Dr. Bill Hargrave in the Office of the Provost and to our donors and our season partners. Now, will you please join me in welcoming Anila, Agha, and Kristen Tordella-Williams. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. Just as a preface, this is my 21st year in the United States. I find that amazing and interesting. So I was born and raised in Pakistan and grew up during fairly turbulent times of that newly formed country. For your information, and in case some people don't know, Pakistan had been part of a much larger continent and was eventually subdivided into 5 countries and was colonialized by the British for many centuries. After independence from the British, the subcontinent got Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, and Nepal. In my opinion, Pakistan developed amnesia of its historical background that had existed for centuries. This often happens when new regimes are born and need to create a new identity, and Pakistan was no different. It wanted a new identity and it negated its Hindu background and made alliances with Arab nations to show solidarity with the Islamic religion, although, in my opinion, there was not much commonality between the two distinct different regions. Thus started a new era of looking away from the subcontinent's ancient history to form a new history. During and after the mass exodus of millions of people moving to opposite sides of a continent the size of probably bigger than Texas, I would think, families were torn apart and friends and neighbors became enemies as well as murderers. My grandmother recounted that trains on arrival from India would rarely have any living bodies in them. And I'm sure the same was happening on the other side. And our shared histories were denied for the next, I don't know, as many years as Pakistan has been alive. So at age 16, I decided to attend art school, and only because an art teacher told me that I should be an artist. My father had passed away by then. The hardships during my adolescence and early adulthood taught me to be inventive and to work hard since there was no support system such as life or death insurance. The years at college were wonderful, truly. I had some amazing professors, female professors, who encouraged us to go on marches with them to protest the Hudud Ordinance, a set of laws that criminalized non-marital sex, including rape, and have led to thousands of women being imprisoned for so-called honor crimes in Pakistan. That's me in the middle up there. In my mid to late 20s, I moved to the United States. Here in the US, as an immigrant, I had to start over. Dallas, Texas was home, and I went to the University of North Texas for my fine art degree and as an MFA. After graduating, I was naturalized as a US citizen, and I moved to Houston for an artist residency at the Houston Center for Contemporary Art, or contemporary craft, really, which allowed me to make work without judgment while also teaching multiple classes. I think I used to teach about 12 classes, 10 to 12 classes a year as an adjunct. I finally relocated to Indiana to join the faculty of the Herron School of Art and Design at IUPUI. In the US, I faced discrimination as an immigrant and found much in common with the discrimination I faced in Pakistan as a woman. I don't do well as a victim, so I got to work 24/7 raising a small child, first with a husband and then as a single parent. Life was hard with limited resources, yet so full of possibilities. My presentation today reflects my own ideas or thoughts, informed by science and my own research. I wanted to preface my presentation with that. I believe my role as an artist is to give a satisfyingly integrated expression to both my physical and intellectual dimensions. For this reason, it is important to me to embed each piece I create with a sense of history, meaning, process, and socially mindful purpose. I obviously feel a deep connection to displaced people anywhere in the world, and this piece reflects my oeuvre. The planet's warming through climate change will continue its destruction, affecting the global south with rising waters and its populations, and causing more and more people to become displaced in the low-lying areas such as Bangladesh, Japan, Taiwan, Vietnam, the Bahamas, New Orleans, the west coast of the Americas, forest fires, drinking water shortages. I don't think anybody is going to be safe in the near future. The global north will have to contend with refugees showing up on its doorsteps. I suppose we could let them drown in the oceans or die on the borders, but conversely, we could let them into our borders and start managing our contributions to the heating of the planet. This particular piece reflects the present and future migrations of people and animals, some becoming naturalized and others disappearing or becoming extinct. Beauty is not beauty is the agency that causes visual pleasure in the beholder, and since pleasure is the true occasion for looking at anything, any theory of images that is not grounded in the pleasure of the beholder begs the question of art's efficacy and dooms itself to inconsequence. I often wonder about this paragraph, as it may have instigated in me the desire to create beautiful art. It may also have been due to the critique I received in graduate school that beauty in itself is banal and thus inconsequential in regards to my excellent craftsmanship. Thus, investing anything I make with meaning is imperative. I make my art excruciatingly beautiful, creating a cliffhanger where opposites collide or meet, creating a combustible moment. Over the past 2 decades, during my travels, I have explored historical buildings. Continuously, my process of self-discovery has led me to the conclusion that I am deeply interested in metaphorical architectural space. Interiors and exteriors, suggestive of the private, social, and political domains. This is the piece in the gallery here. I start with familiar Islamic motifs that I have photographed, which in due course become reinterpretations of the original designs, allowing me to infuse a contemplative focus suggestive of the underlying order of both the cosmos and the natural world through symmetries found in nature. These familiar yet never identical to the original patterns allow the large-scale sculptural installations to create universally welcoming environments through the interplay of light and shadow, while the embroidered works on paper create intimacy and the presence of the feminine. This methodology allows me to excavate and reinterpret these motifs from the everyday and elevate them to the extraordinary to reveal the complexities of symbiosis between genders, cultures, and civilizations and the amorphous borders between them all. I enjoy the contradiction of chaos enclosed within regimented geometries in the more intimate flat works, or create chaotic immersions from rigid geometric objects like the sculptural piece titled A Beautiful Despair that I showed you just a few seconds ago. I want the viewer to confront the contradictory nature of all intersections while simultaneously exploring the boundaries. Often my goal is to explore the binaries of public and private, light and shadow, and static and dynamic by relying on the purity and inner symmetry of geometric design and the interpretations of the cast shadows. Growing up in an amnesia-induced Muslim country led to many early experiences of exclusion due to my gender. Subsequently, being an immigrant in an alien culture has its own challenges. While in Pakistan, I found the gender intolerances perpetuated by illiteracy and incorrect interpretations of religious dogma. However, I believe it's not a problem in the poor locales of the world only, but a global problem perpetuated by illiteracy, lack of opportunities, and economic conditions directly resulting in ill treatment of people. Over time here in the US, through research and art-making processes, I have continued my exploration of gender politics, patriarchal domination, intersectionality, identity, race, colonization, and its aftermath. Conceptually, using my experiences as a woman of color, my artwork reaches beyond the personal to explore cultural binaries such as light and dark, masculine, feminine, public and private, definite and amorphous, life and death, and religious and secular. I want my art to shift between ideas of displaced and reconstructed identity, reflecting my own experiences, stemming from a desire to research, review, highlight, or correct in some small measure the gender and racial imbalances that exist in the world due to race, color, creed, class, or gender. Over time, noticeably, my work has grown more abstract with the narrative element dependent on the invisible presence rather than the actual presence of displaced and gendered identities, while also touching upon literacy that allowed me to soar myself. Despite power inequities, home is a familiar place, and the feeling of inclusivity or intimacy is what I have sought to recreate in my work. My sculptural practice initially was inspired by a visit to the Alhambra in Granada, Spain. There I experienced a space that had inherent contradictions, that is, similarities and differences like in both Pakistan and the US, yet I had freedom to experience the place without bias. The complex was both alien, built by the Moors from the Middle East, but also uncannily familiar. It became my goal to recreate that wondrous experience through my work. I use pattern and color to construct architectural environments that create contradictions such as male and female, light and dark, heavy and light, fragile and strong, to show that our lives are abound with contradictions. The resulting sculptures are steel, cut with delicate lace-like patterns that reflect and refract light. Integrating light and shadows with solid forms, my installations aspire simultaneously to be perceptually soothing and conceptually challenging. The shadows cast in all directions by the light spilling through the sculpture's cutout surfaces work magically, creating a dynamic transformation of the space in tandem with the itinerant movement of the audience, allowing viewers to bask in universal splendor that belongs to all of us. In such a space, it becomes possible to explore the powerful dialogue and shared experience that transcends the barriers that exist due to gender, color, race, religion, and culture. Rethinking our relationship to the planet, empowerment of the world's populations, including the feminine, and revamping the educational materials is essential to the well-being of the world population, I think. And I strongly believe if we educate a single mother, the entire family will benefit. Underlying my move, the real question at the beginning was, who am I in the US and the world? That question was instrumental in my making the kind of work that examined my world here and abroad. Furthermore, we all struggle with identity, and I wanted to provide comprehension of who I was and where I came from to tie these concepts to our collective histories in both the East and the West. Over the years, I've lived on the boundaries of different faiths, such as Islam and Christianity, and in cultures like Pakistan, the US, UK, which has deeply influenced my art, giving it a simultaneous sense of alienation and transience that informs the migrant's experience. Within my art practice, exploring the perceived cultural and social polarities, such as the masculine, feminine, public and private, definite, amorphous, and religious or secular, permits me to delve into controversial subjects that reflect upon topical themes of cultural identity, global politics, mass media, and social and gender roles. The use of a variety of media to create large-scale sculptural installations to question my place within these binaries allows me to inquire into the validity of our broad cultural acceptance of them. With my first and all the subsequent light sculptures I have made over the years, my essential intent was and is to critique organized religion. My original intent was to rectify the injustices perpetrated on women and minorities in cultures across the world due to religious dogma, and often, I think, based on incorrect interpretations of religious doctrine, which reduces women's full potential by the very men who are supposed to make them feel safe and empowered. This piece, particularly, was a way to redress the balance in occupying the oft considered male position of an architect and using a structured geometric object built with materials, again, often attributed to men. The perforated cube with light was my way of using a female perspective in creating space that was in direct contrast to masculine presence or space. The inclusive space I create is by extension inviting all people in, irrespective of race, color, gender, class, or creed. Discrimination in both the East and West may originate due to different reasons, but accomplish the same results, like keeping half of the world population dependent and behind economically. Although recently we've seen a different aspect of it, which is really making me happy. In addition to questioning the assumptions behind the geometric or non-figurative form as certain and static, my work also provokes an investigation into questions of authenticity, which are central to the post-colonial condition. The intertwining of light and shadow, original and derivative, are at the core of the various renditions of pattern. They mirror the post-colonial quest for originality and purity, and ultimately circular geometric pursuit where primary form can only be imagined and never really captured. In our current environment where differences and divergence dominate most conversations about the intersection of civilization, my artwork explores the presence of harmonies that do not ignore the shadows, ambiguities, and dark spaces between them, but rather explore them in novel and unexpected ways. So I use light and shadow and pattern with the palpability of reflection to question the assumptions of geometric design as a form of the pure and transcendent, and thus opposite to representational art. The audience's presence becomes essential in experiencing a shared space while simultaneously affording intimacy, suggestive of the fluidity of human interactions. The shadows cast in all directions by the light spilling through the sculpture's cutout surface work magically, creating a dynamic transformation in the space in tandem with the itinerant movement of the audience. Many of my sculptures or my work starts with something that I heard on the news. I listen to NPR incessantly. And I also listen to BBC. And it's not because I don't trust the news media sources here in the US, but I just think I want to get a better overall view of what's happening. I have over the last many years experimented with painting the environments in dark colors and using multiple light sources to create overlapping shadows to demonstrate the requirement for multiplicity and intersectionality. The current dismissive rhetoric towards people in need hurts my heart and my mind and my soul. As an immigrant myself, who worked hard to help myself and many others in my autistic communities and students, I hope the American dream comes true for many others who flock to the shores of the US. Making work that reflects our current issues is important to me, like this work, for instance. There are two works, actually. One is outdoor and one is outdoor and indoor. I, of course, with the help of multiple people, wanted to comment on the refugee problems in both the US and Europe. When I lived outside of the US, people often talked about the US as a beacon of light for people to flock to. There in America, one can find freedom. However, the vision of America internationally has become tarnished over the past decade and feels more like a mirage, where on arrival, America is unable to provide respite to the hungry and the needy, as it was written on the Statue of Liberty given by France to the US. These two works are titled "This is Not a Refuge," 1 and 2, and were inspired by the beautiful book rest my mother used to read her Quran on. However, if you notice in the second piece, which is here in the galleries, it has no doorway. And I wanted to comment on the lack of agency many people face when confronted by poverty, violence, and destitution. I have been interested in and collected textiles all my life, but initially shied away from exploring it in my artwork, although it showed up regardless. You can't help what you're drawn to, I think. I think it was also due to the condescending debate in the early noughts on pattern and decoration being too feminine, and thus craft carrying little to no meaning. I conceive the flat works often as a series of collage drawings, thinking of them like pages from a book to provide a continuous narrative. Usually the impetus is to explore how social and gender-based issues result from the concepts constructed by our past and recent histories and traditions that continue to shadow us into contemporary times. Through the use of a mixed media approach, I explore the deeply entwined political relationships between gender, culture, religion, labor, and social codes. In my drawings, I have used combinations of textile processes such as embroidery, beading, which you see over here, wax, dyes, silk screen printing, both traditional drawing processes. This is drawn in graphite, to reveal and question the gendering of textile or craft work as inherently domesticated and excluded from being considered an art form. My experiences in both my native country and as an immigrant here in the United States inform and are woven into my work of redefining and rewriting women's handiwork as a pregnant form of creative expression. I also use embroidery as a drawing medium to reveal the multiple layers resulting from the interaction of concept and process, and to bridge the gap between modern materials and historical patterns of traditional oppression and domestic servitude. This work is the first in a new series I am working on now, and I hope to show it in my upcoming show in New York City in September 2022. I believe in building community in the place I live, creating dialogue, tolerance, acceptance, and understanding within people of different classes and various economic and cultural descents. This desire to build bridges is generated by earlier memories from Pakistan. I remember in the fall every year, my mother would invite women of the neighborhood to come and help build, to help make quilts. And the women didn't belong to any one particular strata of society. They would come with their needles and threads, making quilts by hand while talking about families, the neighborhood, and our communities, and the lack of education or politics. Within my work, embroidery embodies an essential femaleness because the push of the needle and the pull of the thread together represent the domestic identity of women and their ambivalent relationship to that identity. Furthermore, the embroidery acts as a drawing line and beckons people in to look deeper, irrespective of gender, sexual preference, or cultural background, and hopefully enables people to rethink on their own histories and the prejudices we all carry. During the embroidery process, the needle and the myriad threads stitch the personal narratives of the community, thus creating beautiful but invisible stories within the very essence of the work. And the seductive and layered surfaces may suggest a deeper exploration of issues of submission, oppression, and domesticity. During my earlier research, I explored American artists such as Eva Hesse and Cy Twombly, and was drawn to their alternative style of drawing. I realized the idea of drawing has to be personal. Drawing to me became a way of expression, and I decided to stretch it like Play-Doh, to encompass mark making through multiple mediums. My embroidery takes the feminine into the masculine arena, subverting the known balance of power and ensuring conversations about the definitions of low craft versus high art, and assigning feminine or masculine roles to objects, processes, and situations. And then many years ago, I saw Alexander Calder's drawings and wire at the Manel in Houston. I realized that shadows inform my own artwork, broadening the concept and accumulating an additional dimension, thus enlarging the depth and breadth of the drawings. I connect the invisibility of the absence or presence of the feminine to the embroidery, linking, building, and making it part of the surface, quiet but graceful. The inserts or cutouts are often waxed to create translucency to allow light in and onto the surface in different degrees. And I limit the use of adhesives and depend on specific color threads to tie, connect, and construct the tactile surfaces. Much of my work is labor-intensive, creating a narrative through process, materials, and concept. Shadows add another layered dimension to the drawings, and the piece becomes a three-dimensional object rather than just a simple drawing. It's tricky to stitch paper as the paper is not pliable and I can only stitch one stitch at a time. And now I've started beading them, so I've added woe to my life. I hope, and it seems obvious to me, that many of you support artists in your communities by funding a project or buying a painting, attending a dance performance or an opera. I think in these work-filled times, we need to refine the soul of our great nation, as it seems to have partially gone missing. I hope you continue to support artists, as we all need light in our midst. I thank all of these people for having me here, all of you for coming to attend this talk, and all the people who are listening in. I am extremely grateful that you spend this time with me. Thank you.
Hi, Anila. Wow, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your background and history with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you covered, I sent you all these questions and you talked so much today and covered many, many things, but I wanted to go a little bit deeper specifically into your work here at the Jewel Collins Smith. So the house piece, colloquially, without a door, the home without a door. Can you share why you chose to bring that piece here and how you adapted that work specifically to the architecture and site of the Jewel Collins Smith Museum?
It was my pleasure to bring my work here because this state is so full of history, and many people have been moved through here. The lands have been taken away or they've been made to work. And I think having a space such as the refuge or the sculpture, the refuge here, kind of talks about all the absences that are not talked about in our current situation, because it is so hard to talk about what humans have done to other humans. And so I think, in a way, the refuge being here and having the walls painted a dark black kind of talks about in an abstract way, of course, the history of place that we all live on. We live on this earth, but there have been millennia behind us. And humans have done atrocious things to other humans prior to us being here. Maybe we could learn from history. And so I am really thrilled to have that piece show here, because it kind of transforms the gallery space in something that is almost, I didn't believe that it could happen. Because, shadows on black, who ever thought about that? So I'm thrilled that it actually worked. Because I was like thinking I may fall flat on my face.
Well, it's a very stunning installation, and the curve of the ceiling accentuates, and then it almost like it disappears into the wall and then reemerges back out again in a way that in some of your other works is much more stark and architectural. So I'm looking through my notes here. It brings me to another question I had, which is about the dramatic environment that you create for viewers. And the lights, it can be kind of aggressive and shine in your eyes, almost like a flashlight or a searchlight. But the space with the patterning creates something like a sanctuary, or something that we see in Islamic architecture or in stained glass windows. And it creates an awe and a beauty in us as viewers. And that leads me to ask you about the sense of beauty that you want to create. And is that an access point for viewers to enter your work, do you think, like creating that sense of beauty? Or is it more about that bright light that shines at you? Is this line that you create for us as viewers?
I think it's a bit of both, because people, when they're defensive, will not listen to you. So if you create an environment that's really beautiful and it calms you down, then you may be able to think about the layered landscape or the layered concepts or the layered histories that we all live with. It's really hard to imagine that we did awful things in the past. How can we get over that defensiveness? Because immediately people will start defending themselves. Oh, I wasn't here. I wasn't even born then. And I think, student. So I personally think that I feel like you have to create an environment where people become soothed. Then maybe they will allow themselves to experience something that may be ugly, but you want to make a pact with yourself that you're going to do better going forward. I don't know. It's sort of like this. In a way, I think it's something that I hope for. You know. Also, I feel like the work that I make, I want it to be inclusive, because growing up, I kind of faced so much discrimination, both as a gendered person, but also as a cultural person. I would hate that to happen to other people, And so in academic institutions, it's not so obvious. But outside, when you go into civil society, it becomes pretty more obvious. And I think that it's like if we educate our people and we talk about history and we show them what we can aspire to, that can kind of change the course of history, I think.
So do you feel it's your mission as an artist is to create these spaces where that transcendence can occur?
I hope so. I mean, I don't know if I'm doing it, but I'm trying.
Aspirations.
Aspirational.
I'm curious about the patterning. So it seems like that's the essential imagery that you use in your work. And so it has this element of beauty that we've been talking about. But do you feel like that it also expresses the history that you're wanting to refer to, as well as, to me, it seems like you talked about this in your talk, responding to art history in the Western world with the use of the cube and then cutting through the cube, and literally putting this other culture in place of a solid cube in the gallery.
Well, when I was going to grad school, and I don't know if young people now have the same experience here, but we were often derided for using anything that was feminine. We were supposed to make work that looked like Richard Serra's work or Matthew Barney's work, or, And I'm like, I'm a woman. I'm not going to make shit like that. You know, I'm sorry. My bad. And then also the other thing was that I didn't really have any representation in my faculty. And often they weren't familiar with my culture. And so their go-to response would often be, don't do this, do this. And I'm like, but this is me. I'm going to make what feels right to me. And so I think pattern became a way of making an identity for myself. And I was also always fascinated by pattern. And there are many male artists, American actually, I can't, one of them, his name escapes me, but he was like showing patterned paintings and, like in New York City. And then also the 60s produced a lot of feminist artists who were also using pattern, and it became a way of like kind of solidarity with that, thinking that, I'm going to kind of figure out a way to make work that fits my paradigm, but also is beautiful, is aspirational, inspiring, and yet pretty much an object.
Well, what's so interesting is that your work is in between object and architecture because it's a sculpture, but it's porous and it casts light and it sheds light and impacts the architecture of the space that it's displayed in. So it exists in this liminal space.
Yeah.
And that to me brings it to that all the experiences you described in your talk about being an immigrant and a woman of color and then coming to the US and having almost that mirage, the discovery of the mirage of the myth of the United States. So I think all these things are just bubbling under the surface. All these layers of your work is really, really wonderful to hear you talk about.
But on the surface, it looks so beautiful. If somebody doesn't want to explore further, it's okay, because you choose who you are. And I'm not going to be the one to deride you or, refuse you. And I think that's really important to being a community. I think a community is so recently so absent, with the vaccines and refusal of vaccines and things like that. It just kind of makes me sad. We need to take care of each other. And that's what I feel strongly.
So your personal community, your family seems like it's really important to you. And it's not just for your home life, right? Because you work very closely with Steve, your husband. You can see in all the credits his name under the designer. So I often work with my husband, and sometimes it can be very fun, and sometimes it can be incredibly frustrating. Why don't you think of things the way I think of things? So I know right now you're separate, and your studio is split between Georgia and Indiana. Can you talk a little bit more about how your process has changed due to that distance or separation, or has it changed at all? And what is your work looking like now that you've moved away and started working in Georgia?
Well, Georgia has beautiful flora and fauna, and that has really inspired me. So I've started actually doing a lot of collage again. But Steve drives me nuts, as well as, I love him dearly. He and I were talking the other night, and we talk a lot. So, and then we share face talk or, like video chat and all that. But we kind of said the other night that he's got an engineer's mind and I've got a poet's mind. And often that's difficult to kind of, somehow make it work. But, we can do the best we can. Really, I mean, the work has changed in some ways, and I'm not very confident in showing the new pieces yet, because I haven't gotten very far in it. But I think I'm kind of working through certain things. And then also, I think it's kind of good that we are distant from each other physically, geographically, because when you work closely with somebody for too long, you start becoming like each other. And so I think that distance is allowing for my practice to breathe a little. And I do miss him, of course, and I miss all sorts of comforts that he would provide. He'd take out the garbage every day. Come on.
Very nice.
So, and he would drive everywhere. So now I had to drive here. So I had to take a 2-hour nap in Atlanta.
So you talked a little bit in your talk about your love of textiles and garments. Can you share with us a little bit of your experience, maybe working in that as an industry and not maybe in the domestic sphere, but more in an industrial sense?
So when I was growing up, my father, since he passed away and we didn't have insurance, I had to go to work. So I worked in the textile industry because Pakistan at that point in time was a cotton producing country. And so I was working in factories, designing the fabric that designers from the US would send us. And then I had to translate everything. So I was the actual technical person making the textile. I was kind of called the merchandiser, and I think Aisha, one of the students, mentioned that she was studying to be that. So I worked for Levi Strauss of all companies in Pakistan, and I would take that vision and translate that into actual product. And so I have about 15 years of textile experience. And at that time, I think I wanted to be a fashion designer. But then once I started working in the industry, I kind of realized I hate this because it's like dog eat dog.
Yeah.
You know, it was just the prices that we had to provide to the foreign companies meant that people would go hungry. And I just started hating it. But I have a lot of knowledge on textiles and machinery and industry, and that's why it's so easy for me to go to the industry to get these big projects built, because I understand how to kind of bifurcate the different processes. And then, of course, Steve is a genius engineer, and so he helps me figure it all out. In Indiana, initially, we did have some issues, especially during the Trump presidency, where people started refusing my work because of the imagery on it. And I was like, so Steve, who's American and white, he was like, I wonder if it's your name that's making it. So I'm going to just call it Sunshine Fine Art or something like that.
Yeah.
We never changed it, but for a short while there, we had some issues. But then, if you keep working with people long enough, they realize that you pay on time, you're good to them, and it kind of works out in the end.
So my last question before we open up to the audience would be, what advice would you give to young artists? Like, what would you suggest? Maybe a small piece of advice.
Well, there would be a lot of stuff that I could say. First, work hard. Don't think you're going to get instant fame. It took me 21 years to get here. And then secondly, create your own tribe. Family is family, of course, and you love them. But having people who understand where you're coming from, your art, and your design capabilities, you need people who support that. And so build your tribe and don't let go of them, because they will be there when everybody else leaves. They'll show up at your shows when nobody else will come. They'll come to your talks when nobody else will come.
Yeah.
I have friends who, when I had my opening and my talk at the Eamon Carter in Fort Worth, my friend from Houston drove 5 hours to come visit. And then, so we hung out, and it's just those things that keep you kind of going, and it's really important.
Thank you so much, Anila.
My pleasure, Kristen. Thank you so much for your time.
So I think we have time for a few questions from the audience. So what questions are there for Anila?
I have a microphone I can pass around. If you raise your hand, we only have time for a couple questions. Jean has a question.
Hello. Okay, I was wondering, I have a question about your process. So your work is extremely symmetrical and has a lot of geometric qualities to it. It almost looks like something that would be made on Adobe Illustrator or something. So I was curious how you get that level of precision and craftsmanship in your work, and do you start with a sketch, or do you work digitally at some point in your process? I was curious how you get it so precise.
So I do work on Adobe Illustrator to create the work, but first I travel, and then I'll take photographs, and I'll take the pattern that I like out of the photograph, and I'll recreate it. And it's really difficult to do that, because architecturally, when you're really small and you're taking a photo of a big building, it becomes a little off. And so I kind of think of those things and I'll incorporate them into the work. So like many of my design works, you won't find them together in a singular space. I kind of pull them from different places. I have like thousands of photographs that I pulled from now. There are some places that I would keep going back to over and over again. There's a particular place in Lahore called the Jehangir's Tomb, which was seriously one of my favorite places to go because it was so quiet there. The river Ravi had changed course. And so it was no longer going alongside of the city of Lahore, but it was like going a different direction. And so people stopped going there. And it had a silence I've never heard since. And so I would go there with my sisters, my younger sisters, and we would spend time there. And it just allowed my imagination to kind of fly. So that's one place I would keep going back to. Every time I go back to Pakistan, I visit there. But then I love going to Spain as well, because it's a combination or a integration of East and West there, which I find really fascinating. And then after I've taken like a couple of patterns that I think will fit together, then I'll create them. I'll first draw them by hand, and then I'll do the illustrator on it. And then I'll, depending on the material, I'll either use a laser machine, a CNC, or a water jet, depending on what I want to have cut. Does that help you? Absolutely. Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up question regarding your drawings? So with the beading, those are all done by hand. So do you draw onto the paper and follow that pattern, or do you cut, or, you know, like how do you get that symmetry when you're working solely by hand?
I'm totally retentive. Okay. But I also have a laser machine in my studio in Indianapolis. And so once I've drawn the pattern out, then I can put it on the laser machine and do the pinpricks. So then somebody has to sit there and punch the holes. So the drawings actually take a lot longer as well, because there are three processes. First, you have to punch it, then you have to stitch it, and then you have to bead it. So it's like 3 times over. I don't think I'll ever get paid for the amount of time I put in it.
Thank you, yes.
Thank you so much for your talk and for sharing your work with us. I have a sort of philosophical question about religion and kind of multiplicity and singularity. I love that when you were talking about the Alhambra in particular, the way that you see the complexity of patterns, and it seems like a metaphor in your work for the kind of multiplicity of identity, of humanity. And it seems like you're pulling these threads out of religion that actually get at that kind of multiplicity. But on the other hand, you also charted cases where religion is a kind of stringent force and a kind of limiting force. And do you see your work as kind of drawing out that sort of paradox? Or are you focusing more exclusively on the multiple that religion also enables us to experience?
Well, I think that our lives are made up of contradictions. On the one hand, do you remember the painting called The Scream by Edvard Munch? So if you think about that painting, and he's out there alone in this landscape and he's screaming, and that's what I see humanity as. I see us as wanting to have faith. But I wonder if the faith is in us, or is it in some being that exists outside of us? Maybe it is us, and this is as good as it gets. You know, the film where, was it Jack Nicholson?
Yeah.
I find that movie really quite evocative in that way, because if you think about it, like, we live on this earth, we cannot see God. Nobody's God is visible. And yet we strive for perfection. And then on the other hand, we do these atrocious things to other people. How does a God who exists would do or allow us to do these things? So it has to be faith, right? A faith. So I think like I would see or view it as more like a multiplicity of threads that have to come together for us to form a better human being. I don't know. I mean, like I'm not religious anymore. I used to be. I think of us as, you know, if we can do better to other humans, maybe that is my religion. I don't know. It's a philosophical question that has no answer. It's personal, I think. Yeah.
Last question, if anyone has one. Okay.
Hi.
Hey.
How do you react when, like, if you're talking to someone and you put like a really like, you kind of put a lot of like your emotion into your work, and someone's just like, yeah, it's pretty, but whatever, or like that doesn't really make sense. Like, how do you find you react, or like, what do you do? Because like I'm a young artist, and like sometimes I like put a bunch of like effort into something, and then like some adult, not to be mean to y'all, but y'all be like, yeah, like it's pretty, or it's okay. Like, how do you find that, like, I don't know, maybe like it's confidence and like, this is my work, this is what it means, like I put this into it, no one else really, or like, I mean, other people's opinions matter about art, but like, kind of, how do you find your own like self-confidence and like, my art is my art, and this is what it means. It doesn't really matter if someone else interprets it another way, like it's okay, I guess. If that makes any sense.
So that's got multiple questions in there. First, I think teachers always mean well, you know, and artists or poets or writers, I think they often take it very personally when somebody is critiquing your work. So it's really important to develop a skin like the rhinoceros, so it deflects. If you believe in yourself and in your art enough, you're going to survive it. But it'll make you better. Because teachers only want the best for you. And I am a teacher, and I know I can be harsh as a critic sometimes. But I'll tell you, recently what I have started thinking is that, you know, we need more poets and more writers and more artists in the world, because we need to bring communities together. I'm never, ever going to fail anybody ever again. That's a decision I made once, you know, the recent elections happened. But I am critical of my students' work, but I'll tell them why. So if you don't understand, you should ask, because it has to be a two-way street. It has to be a dialogue. And if your teacher is telling you something is not working, she's or he's seeing something that's not working, you gotta listen sometimes. Young people find it harder to listen. And it's okay, because I was young once and I was often like, what the F? You know, why did this person say this to me? But over time you realize that they all mean well. And it's for the better. You know, I mean, that's why you're in school. You're trying to learn. And then if I remember, you have to develop your confidence. You are going to develop it. The more you work, the more intense your practice is going to become. And when all of these people leave you, meaning that you graduate and you move on, you're going to feel extremely lonely, because there's going to be nobody providing what you need, the critique. So you need to develop a tribe that goes with you wherever you go. And that is an important thing, I think, for young young artists. Did I cover all?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank
I
you,
hope
everyone.
that helped.
Yes, I think we have maybe 5 minutes to go run through the galleries before we have to leave. But if you have not yet checked out Anila's show in the exhibition space, please do. And even if you just run in and run out and come back later to spend an extended amount of time in there, I encourage you all to do so. It's a beautiful exhibition. So I'm really grateful
Thank
to you,
you so
Anila.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen.